This is the most malleable material in the world. You can build anything with this. Your customers will copy it and give it to everybody else they know. Ordered 5,000 PCBs to be manufactured while we went off to the party. Europe was ahead at that stage in telecommunications. The battle was won and lost within about 12 months in 1995, 96. Spent the first 20 years of my career building software, and the second 20 years building companies that build software. They were living on noodles, and we locked ourselves away for 3 days on Waiheke Island. Said, right, we're not coming back until we've chosen a vertical.
This is Mark Pawlikowski, and welcome to the TechMates podcast, where my partner Henrik and I explore how Kiwi and Aussie founders are reshaping the future and what sets them apart. Henrik and I have been part of successful companies in Silicon Valley and Europe, and now bring that expertise to partner with entrepreneurs in Australasia. By sharing the personal stories of successful Kiwi and Aussie founders and how they got here, we hope to inspire you to dream big. This is TechMates, bringing an outsider's perspective to the stories of those daring to disrupt down under. Let's dive in.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us on TechMates.
Yeah, thanks, Hendrik. Thanks for inviting me along.
Yeah, no, super excited to have you on. We've just been chatting a little bit in German before, so you had a great overseas experience, as they say in New Zealand, in Germany and in the UK. So we want to hear all about that. But maybe starting with kind of where you grew up. So you're from New Zealand originally, is that right?
Yes, first generation New Zealander, born and grew up in southern Taranaki in Heartland, New Zealand.
Wow. Which town?
I was born in Hawera.
We were just talking to the founder of Sharesies, and he's also from there.
No way.
Yeah.
I met him. Need to catch up.
Seems to be like an entrepreneurial place.
It's really not. It's really not.
Probably has the highest per capita entrepreneurship place in New Zealand because it's such a small population.
Well, I guess 90% of the people that live down there are farmers, dairy farmers, so you could count them as entrepreneurs, actually. So I take it back.
Yes.
You might be right.
That's true. And so what made you kind of leave New Zealand at a young age and explore Europe?
Yeah, that was a big leap from born in Hawera to leaving New Zealand.
We can talk about a little bit of growing up in Howrah. What was that like?
Well, we got a lot to cover. You have a very long career.
A whole lot of stuff.
Yeah, tell us more.
A whole lot of stuff happened in between. But eventually I went off in an OE that ended up in, I want to put it forward as the world's longest OE because it took me 27 years. But it wasn't intended to. Yeah, growing up in, if you want to hear, so growing up in rural heartland New Zealand. So I was born in the 1960s. Yeah, I had a few challenges in my early life, I guess.
What happened?
A series of surgeries to get me to walk and run. And the last one of those was when I was 14. So I was kind of in and out of school and in a small kind of area. The school I went to, primary school, up until about age 11, was a small country school. We had between 10 and 12 students in the school at various times.
You have to pay good money for that now to get that kind of teacher to student ratio.
Yeah, I think it must have been excellent. I think future events, I think, have showed that it was probably pretty good education I got on the New Zealand public education systems. But then I went off to high school. I sort of missed my year when I was 14 in the hospital. But otherwise, I kind of turned out to be pretty smart. But I turned out, I did okay with the academic stuff and finished high school like a year early, 17. I went off to university after a season of a job milking cows and making hay to earn some money to go off to university. There were no fees back then for going to university, but there were also no student loans or anything. I had to go and live in Auckland for 4 years. So I flipped burgers for 4 years, 2 nights a week, 2 8-hour evening shifts, flipping burgers.
8 hours?
Every week. Yeah. The Thursday one was good. That was like 5 p.m. And I did a Saturday shift of 8 p.m. till 4 a.m., which was a bit of a killer.
Oh, wow.
So I was still young, sleep's optional when you're young. I'd get home at like 4:30 in the morning on a Sunday morning for that. And often I wouldn't even bother going to sleep. No point. And just carry on with my day. And it never ever seemed to slow me down.
So like when your friends were out partying, you were flipping burgers?
Yeah, I didn't have the best Saturday night party life there. But yeah, that got me through it. In the vacations there, I worked in the railway workshops in Auckland repairing locomotive diesel engines and electric motors. So I was able to finance myself. I went to engineering school. I liked to build things. I'd never seen a computer when I was younger, but I did build things like crystal radio set. I used to make hot air balloons out of tissue paper and balsa wood and wait for an easterly wind and send my model soldiers off towards Australia. But I like to build things. And so I signed up for mechanical engineering, thought I'd go and build stuff. In my last year of high school, I was actually incredibly lucky because I think we may have been one of the only classes in New Zealand in 1978 that learned to program computers. So we had a physics teacher who said, I want to learn how to program a computer. So we're all going to learn together. And we spent that year learning to program. Slight challenge. There was no computer at the school. There were a dozen computers in New Zealand, right? And they're all locked away in the basement of either the government, the Bank of New Zealand, or the 4 major universities. So what we would do is we would learn to code, we'd do a lesson, and then we'd write some code on punch cards. And the teacher would collect up our punch cards, put a rubber band around each one, put them in an envelope, and send it to Massey University.
Wow.
And then they would run it on their PDP 10 or 11. And after about 2 weeks, we'd get a big envelope back in the post and we'd go into class, you'd open the envelope, you'd pull out all the Z-fold printed paper, hand it out to each student, and you'd get your printout, you'd race back to your desk and you'd open it up and it'd go error on line 1. And then you'd debug, and you'd have another 2-week debug cycle. But by the end of the year, we'd learn to program in BASIC, extremely rare situation. And so I was kind of ready at university when we started to do computer programs around thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and the mechanical study. And it was pretty soon that I realized it was actually writing the software that I enjoyed a lot more than the thermodynamics. So I like building things. I like building and making things. And I had this kind of epiphany after getting the hang of Fortran, Pascal, and BASIC, and it really kind of gelled that this is the most malleable material in the world. You can build anything with this. And it didn't have seemed to have the same constraints that metals had, or even plastics, or any other physical materials. I just loved that world. Even with the challenge that in a first year of engineering, we're only allowed 30 minutes terminal time on the PDP 11 every week, 30 minutes a week. So the rest of the time, you're still having to input your code via punch cards, picking up your printouts, but you got 30 minutes of debugging time a week. That wasn't enough for me.
That's better than before, right? It's a bit faster feedback cycle than before.
But faster than before, yeah. It was pretty much immediate. You could go and reshuffle your punch cards if you got them in the wrong order and run it again. So there was no limit on the running your software on the computer as long as you input your program via punch cards.
Bob, and let's just take a quick detour. Most people don't know what punch cards are.
Wow. Okay. So before you even had a keyboard and a screen to type commands into a computer, the input to a computer was just this kind of tray that would take punch cards. And the punch card, each card was effectively a line of code. And on the left-hand side, there might be a series of commands that you could give, like move or go to. And then there were line numbers, there were sections for data and other entries. But each card was effectively a line of code. So each line of code you would either punch out a little perforated hole, or later you would just mark with a 2B pencil over the thing. You're basically checking a box.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would get your cards in order and you would put them into this tray, this hopper, and the computer input system would cycle through your cards and read your code into the computer and then run it. It would run it, and it wouldn't display anything on a screen because you didn't have one. It would print it out on the printer, and you'd have to go and see the printer with what the output was.
So this was a punch card. Is this one of the machines you guys use?
Yeah, that kind of thing. You put it exactly that. You put it in the hopper
Up here.
You can punch it out. The innovation with being able to mark them with a 2B pencil means you didn't need a special punch card machine to punch them. You could just put it on your desk and do it. So
and
that was genius.
This was like literally numbers. You were selecting which numbers. Is binary code?
It wasn't so much binary as like there's a section on the code. So you would have punch cards for, say, BASIC or say the Fortran language. And on the left, you've got all these syntax elements. So you would have a for and a while and things like that you would mark. Going back 40 years ago, I haven't seen them a lot since, but you would kind of mark them out on these cards.
Back in the day, did you already see, I mean, it's hard to kind of see where this is going, right? When you see something like this, but did you already kind of feel like there's potential for computers to one day change the world?
No, absolutely not. I just enjoy doing it. We're still in that pre-personal computer era where computers are still enormous machines that are only useful to enormous corporations or governments. And still nobody could envisage why you would want a computer on your desk and what you'd do with it. I mean, home computers were already a thing. I had, because I was only allowed 30 minutes of terminal time a week on the PDP-11. By the way, that PDP-11, it has probably 30 times less processing power than the chip on the credit card in your pocket. And that was shared by the entire engineering school student body.
Than the chip on the credit card?
The chip on your credit card is 30 times more powerful than a PDP-11.
When you say there was so much you could do, so malleable, what could you actually do on it?
So you could write in multiple languages. You could, so most of what I was doing in those first few years of engineering was solving thermodynamics problems, fluid mechanics equations. But you were also exchanging programs and early games that you could run, programs you could run that would print out artworks on the printer, things you could do to make it look as though you were doing something for university, but it was actually just fun. But it was really I had a Heathkit home Z80 8-bit CPU based sort of DIY computer, and then a ZX81. So the 8-bit, the CPU like home hobby computers were coming out around about then, 79, 80 I had. And of course at home I had unlimited time I could spend on them. So to make games, to make music, it was still pretty clunky. You needed to use your TV as a terminal monitor, music cassette player you had to use to store your software. You would save it onto music cassettes, basically in analog audio kind of form, and then read it back in. Still pretty clunky, but it was already starting to get interesting what you could do with it and the fact that you could control things from it. Yeah, so that was, so I switched to, in the later stages, to electronics from mechanical. But yeah, but it was really the software that had really got me by the end of that. And I had a bit of a taste. I worked at the railways on their computer, building a database for the locomotive maintenance straight out of university. But then within 6 months, I went off on my OE with a friend. We just decided to go off and see the world, do the two-year OE, and sort of traveled our way across Asia. Took us about 6 months to get to Europe.
So you graduated from university, and then you took the OE.
Yeah, sorry, yes. Yep,
and you
graduated.
You had some money saved up, I guess?
I had a bit of money saved up. I basically saved everything in that first 6 months that I worked after graduating, saved everything, and went off traveling with that. That was enough to get me halfway around the world.
Where they get you to? Europe?
We were in a good taste of the sort of startups to come. I did it lean. We did out traveling very, very lean, stayed in some pretty wild places. But I got to Europe, ran out of money when I got to Europe. My first job was I spent a season picking grapes in southern France.
Beautiful.
And then went over to UK and actually found a job as a software engineer in Germany that was being advertised for, including in UK, that I applied for. And bought a car, drove to Germany. Thought this should be fun.
UK?
From the UK. Yep.
So this was still West Germany, right?
Yes, correct. So there was no tunnel either, so I had to go on a ferry. Henrik, you're right. But to get to Germany, this was West Germany. It was near Frankfurt. Was the original electronics company that I went to join.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, I don't speak German. Can't be that hard. I'll pick it up. And I got there, and the only one in the business who spoke English was the guy who hired me. He didn't mention that when he was hiring me, but I had one person that I could speak English to. But otherwise, I was in an office with a Polish guy who had been in Germany for 15 years and two German guys, and none of them spoke any English. And I went, okay, wow.
No, you have to learn.
That's called being thrown in the deep end. But I must have done okay at that, because 2 years later, I started my first business with a friend that I'd made there. He was a born sales guy, while he was still in high school, he was buying and selling cars to his parents' friends. We kind of teamed up, the classic sales guy and the engineer guy, to start a business, and completely naive about what it meant. Remember, there's no internet around here. Personal computers have arrived, the IBM PC and the clones have started appearing. But there's no internet. There's no common knowledge about things like Silicon Valley culture or what a startup is. I'd never heard the term venture capital or anything like that. We just started with a bit of money that we scratched together. We just started to bootstrap our own business.
What made you interested in starting your own business? Why was that even a thing on your mind? Why was that interesting to you?
I think I've always been pretty independent minded. I think it's growing up on a remote farm, maybe going to small school, having to kind of, make my own choice to go to university when nobody in my family had ever done it, how to finance my way once I was there. I've never been entirely comfortable with like working for a corporation. I think I'd always been kind of assuming that at some point I'll be making my own way, or my ego has no need. I don't have a drive to be, the guy. I've always started companies together with other smart, kind of driven people that I respect. Yeah, I've never had a need to be the guy, but I have always yearned for that independence, I think. So yeah, Frank and I just started this off. We needed ideas. Frank's father was having heart problems at the time, and he was telling us about how the cardiologist was taking like ultrasound images of his heart at various heartbeat stages. They were being printed out, and he was at his desk with a ruler and a calculator, and he was measuring these different measurements on the heart and using his calculator to calculate the ratios. And I said, yes. So I think we can help that. So there were already early tablets were there. The PC was around, to say. So we thought, right, if we can get this on the screen and he can use a stylus on a tablet, we can get the surgeon, the cardiologist, to mark the points that he's doing by hand. And then obviously the computer can calculate the ratios that he's doing. We didn't understand what they were, but we worked with this cardiologist. He said yes, and he would help market it for us. So I wrote the software. It worked. He signed it off. And then I learned the first of many lessons in my startup career, and that was that one customer doesn't make product market fit. And even worse, we got in a terrible situation where we got into an IP dispute with him, where he felt because he gave us all of the information and everything, it should be his IP that he would then go and resell. And he started to try and sell it himself. So we ended up litigating my very first business and the very first product we make. We end up in litigation with our only customer.
Jesus, that's rough.
And we came away with a 30,000 Deutschmark settlement. Remember the Deutschmark, Hendrik?
I vaguely remember. Yeah. But what was it like starting a business in Germany back in the day? I mean, probably, not a very friendly.
Yeah. And we won. We kind of won, but we lost because we got a 30,000 euro settlement for IP breach. But this guy was our only route into that market, and that door was closed off. So that product was dead. So we had what I now understand to know is a pivot, but we didn't have any of this terminology back then. We basically dumped that business line, and and one of Frank's friends ran. God, I'm really aging myself here. Really ran a video cassette rental store.
Oh yeah,
and what he needed was something to manage the stock and the lending and the customers and things. Basically, he needed a PC-based ERP system for a video rental store. Right?
And he was before that he was managing it on pen and paper.
Yeah. He was just using.
Bob checked out this video, like you write it down.
Yep, he had a book.
Oh my God.
He had a book.
Wow.
So I built him that using Turbo Pascal and I think it was DBase for the database language. So I built him this system, but this time we did go and talk to other customers to get sort of general requirements so that we would know if this was a general need. So we did talk to other video store owners, and we built a product that was going to be useful to all of them. and that got a sale or two, like a handful of sales, and then we learned another lesson.
How are we pricing this?
Basically, just whatever. I think we just worked it out on whatever they could afford to pay. We were still experimenting with pricing when we ran into a massive problem and learned a new lesson. Not so relevant for today, but back then it was that if you ship your software on a floppy disk,
people can copy it.
Your customers will copy it and give it to everybody else they know. And it wasn't a huge TAM. So addressable market was undermined by our customers just basically shipping copies of our floppy around.
What was the business environment like in Germany back in the day? Were there a lot of people who kind of supported you? Were you looked at as crazy for starting a software business?
Trying to think of any actual external support that we got whatsoever. I wrote the software, Frank sold it. That was pretty much it.
That was it. Yeah. Yeah, I just can't imagine.
We were learning Germans all the lessons the hard way.
Yeah, I just can't imagine Germans in the 90s, like, being very business minded. There was really, Silicon Valley culture only arrived maybe 5 years ago, right? So
yeah,
that must have been very hard.
This was in the 80s still, right? This is in the 86, 87, 88 time frame. Yeah, so that line of business was dead too. So cue another pivot. And then we thought, okay, this software stuff's too hard. Maybe we'll look at hardware, and let's look at hardware to solve our problem that we just found. So I designed a small. I did remember some of my electronics from university, so I designed a little dongle that you'd plug into the RS-232 serial port on your PC that acted basically as like a private key. So when you send out your software, if it's expensive software, it wouldn't work if it was just a game, but expensive piece of software, you'd ship out one of these keys with it and say to the customer, plug this, make sure this is plugged into your 232 port. It's a pass-through, so you can still plug your whatever you've got, joystick or whatever on the other side of it if you still need to. But basically, you can't run the software without this thing being plugged into your computer. So did a prototype, that worked, great. And then we got a production run, I think 5,000 printed circuit boards done.
In Germany?
I did the digital. Well, I'd done the digital layout to do the prototype, but I gave it to the guy who does the photo etching layouts that I'd used from my job, and he laid out the photo mask and sent it back. And normally, as I've done in my sort of my work job and professional job, you go through that pin by pin, right? You get this basically. It looks like a photo of the circuit board with all the lines. What's later going to be all the little silver lines on the printed circuit board. You've got a transparency with black tape marking out all of those lines. And what you have to do is you get two engineers. You get one on the logic diagram that I'd done, and you get one on this mask, and you go, and one of them shouts out, right, CPU pin 1 to resistor R check, memory chip 1, pin 3 to CPU pin 12. Check, and you go through it. And this guy was such a good photo mask professional that he'd always come up 100% on everything he'd provided for us when I was doing it at the business I was working at. So I trusted the guy, and we had a party. That was a Saturday night, and I wasn't flipping burgers in Germany, and we had a party to go to. So me and Frank said, he's always right. There's no point. That's a real tedious task. It takes hours. So we shipped it off and ordered 5,000 PCBs to be manufactured while we went off to the party.
Damn.
And we got this huge box of boards back with all the ICs and the resistors and everything we needed, populated it, put one together, plugged it into the computer. Guess what happened?
Blows up.
Nothing. So then we go through and we check the photo mask, and sure enough, there was a mistake on the photo mask. So
damn,
we were making a lot of
Yeah, and I guess nowadays you have enough people like yourself who can sort of help other people avoid these mistakes. But yeah, you're kind of on your own, right?
Yeah. That was one I should have known, because that was one I'd learned at a proper job. But
that was go party.
Yeah, so it was a good party. I don't regret it. It was a really good party, but it's probably for a different podcast. But yeah, so I called it a day there. We wound it up. That's it. First business failure behind me.
Wait, so that was it? So you didn't pursue that further? You're like, this is such a big fuck up. We're just not gonna do this further.
Well, we were broke. We spent all our money. We spent all our money on those 5,000 PCBs and all of the chips and all of the ICs and all of the equipment to populate them. That was all of the cash we had, and we had the choice. Right? Do we put more of our own money into this and double down and go again? And we just went, okay. I think we need to learn some more before we start a business again. So
how old were you at that point?
I would have been 25, maybe by then, something like that.
So you were like, whatever,
26.
like it's my first business, I learned my lessons, now going back to work.
Yeah. I want to go back. I want to go back and write software again and get some sanity back in my life. So let me try. And maybe there's still some stuff we need to learn before we do this. So I went took a job at the software lab of Deutsche Telekom, Darmstadt. Probably this is in a time in about 89, 90. This is a time where telecommunications was still government business, right? Every country had a telecommunications government arm. There was no deregulation. There were no startups. There were no cellular carriers or anything. So the software lab of Deutsche Telekom was a great place to go and work. Probably the equivalent in the US would be Bell Labs of AT&T. At the time, they were making a lot of money in telecoms. Back in the day, a phone call was horrifically expensive, especially if you phoned another country. And there was a lot of experimentation and building for things. So I worked on some great projects there. For engineer, became a lead developer, worked on online banking. This is still pre-internet. Online banking in Germany. Maybe your parents will remember it, Hendrik. You'd dial into the Deutsche Telekom computers. It would give access to the banking system, and you could do wire bank transfers from home. You could look at your bank balance. And we actually built a public terminal for it. Still, nobody knew what the internet was going to be or where it was going to go. But in the early 90s, I led a project to build a public terminal that would be put into railway stations and post offices where you could walk up to it at a keyboard and a screen, and you could basically do your online banking. You could see pages from retailers on there and flick through. I guess it was equivalent of in France, they had the Minitel at the time that they put into households. It was a kind of a pre-internet, quasi-internet thing.
Interesting. Would you say that, like, looking back, Europe at that stage was on par with the US in terms of like innovation and development in this industry?
So I'll get a lot of blowback about this, but I'm pretty sure that Europe was ahead at that stage in telecommunications and data communications and networking. I'm pretty confident we were, but I'm biased because I was there in the middle of it. But remember, while I was working there, I also worked on the specs and designs for the GSM digital mobile specifications. And Europe for the later part of the 90s was well ahead of the US in terms of mobile or cellular digital communications. US in the late 90s people were still using pagers, using analog phones. It was disjointed. The volumes were low. But yeah, we were working on. There was actually there were two competitions that I was kind of heavily involved in at the time, philosophical in the industry. So one was the fight between the European ISO norms of networking, which we felt were more robust. They had built-in security, things like non-repudiation. It was all built in. I led an X400 client-server email system product. In the mid-90s, it was more secure than probably any email system used today. It was used by the German government right up until about 2010. Whereas we looked at the standards for network protocols coming out of the US, like TCP/IP and SMTP and POP3, as really insecure, amateur. They were sort of crowdsourced rather than designed by experts. We didn't give them much chance of like winning the battle of the networks. We were totally wrong, of course, but we were pretty confident in the network technologies that Europe was putting out at the time.
So what happened? How did US overtake Europe?
So what happened so we were using networks to access like university computers for research material or things like that. We'd use FTP and TCP/IP among all the other European protocols being used. We weren't not using them, but for serious work where we had to support businesses, like we built a logistics information network for BMW, one for Lufthansa. We used the ISO network protocols, X25, we used X400, X500, way more robust and like I say, secure than these crowdsourced ones. The battle was won and lost within about 12 months in 1995, 96, when the World Wide Web, Mosaic and Netscape appeared, and the internet began. And I think I recognized the first time I used Netscape. So Mosaic was still a bit clunky. The first time I used Netscape on a PC, I thought that was the first time I really had a feeling. I haven't had that feeling since until I first used ChatGPT in 2022. That was such an experience. Like, oh wow, I've been here once before, and both times it was very hard to explain to people what I saw.
Looking back,
Yeah.
what did you see?
I just saw the openness, the freedom, the ease with which you could now create the web pages and suddenly open all these networks up to normal people, and that normal people not working in government labs would be able to communicate and share like visually impactful information. And it was like, wow. And the fact that it was happening and you're already seeing like a burger bar in Hawaii was already putting its menu on the internet, and these kind of things that were just like, this has no limits.
Do you think you underestimated how big it would end up being? Or do you think it kind of played out exactly as you had thought it would?
Well, remember in the meantime, we've been through an internet boom and bust. 96, it was very early. I spent a lot of time trying to explain to people what I was seeing and what I thought was happening. And at this time, there were plenty of computer networks. CompuServe had millions of subscribers. You'd dial in. That was probably the closest equivalent to what I'd been working on for Deutsche Telekom for German subscribers. It was called BTX back then, or T-Online it became, and eventually flipped onto the internet. But there were non-IP based networks all over the world that people were buying things on. They were on forums discussing things. So the internet initially in 96 by a lot of people was just another network, and a really crappy one, because you go on the sites and it looks, compared to the beauty of CompuServe and all these proprietary network platforms, the internet was just the Wild West, and it was full of garbage and things in construction. And people thought I was mad. I was like, yeah, but CompuServe it's got a wall around it. T-Online, Deutsche Telekom, everything's got a wall around it. This is the first time. There's no limit to this. That was, I think, what I saw. Yeah, and then you had the parallel surge in that late 90s period of the rise of the web, triggering the .com boom, but also the digital mobile boom, which was triggered by the liberalization of telecommunications around the world, where suddenly within about a 2 to 3 year time period, if that, every country in the world is issued a license for multiple telecommunication operators suddenly, and telecommunications became a competitive space. And the GSM that I'd worked on was one of the primary drivers of the growth, that you could contact Ericsson or Alcatel or Nokia. You could start up a business could start up a mobile network, go to one of these network operators, buy a full GSM off-the-shelf running network and get it up and running and start charging subscribers. And there was exponential growth in those mobile cellular subscribers, as well as exponential growth in the use of the web. And both of those things were happening in parallel in that period of the late 90s. And then finally, mainstream came on board. And of course, the stock market got on board, and VCs got on board, and everybody went overboard, of course, as they always do. And then you had the bucket of cold water thrown on the whole thing in 2001.
Yeah, and if you said you had a similar thought when you first tried ChatGPT in 2022. Do you think we're going to go through like a similar sort of, and then maybe a bust before things kind of shape up? Or how do you think about that?
No idea. I don't know. I believe it's significant. It's already been significant. There's a lot of talk about today, like has the training of these models, has their improvement hit a wall? Are they still going up? I think the simple thing for me is the level that they're at now is going to change the world. You don't have to improve these models anymore to know that the tools and the businesses that come out of this in the next 5 to 10 years are going to change society and change the way we build software and change the way we sell and how corporations are structured. I think it seems pretty clear to me. So yeah, I think we're in another revolution, and that's even if the training curve stops tomorrow and they don't get any better. Most of the world, and we're talking about it here and now, And most of the world has seen something about it in a magazine or on the TV news or something, but most of the world has no idea what these things are really capable of today. And they certainly haven't flown through into people's daily lives outside of maybe a bubble that we're in. There's still a long way to go. And the world has a lot of inertia. The economy has inertia. All those big corporate entities have a lot of inertia behind them. Industries like law, education, even software engineering have a lot of inertia. It doesn't flip on a dime. And remember with the internet, like I was talking about 96, 97, seeing what's coming. We didn't really get social media until 2010, 15 years later, before we saw things like, before we saw the iPhone, before we saw Facebook, before we saw things like Uber, Airbnb. Not much happened, to be honest, for the first 10 or 15 years.
Yeah. And I guess people got very excited in the first few years, and then the expectations were just too high and the output just couldn't live up to it.
They were right that it was going to change the world, but everybody expects it to happen straight away. But yeah, the things like the economy, well, we'll see if the economy's got inertia.
It's got inertia in one direction right now.
Yeah, we should say we're recording this in the week where the tariffs were introduced, or the week after. So I don't know when we're going to air this, but hopefully the stock market has recovered then.
You don't want to tell the historical record who introduced them.
Yeah,
the Trump tariffs.
Okay. Anyway, are we still talking about my OE?
So what happened? So you're kind of seeing this thing kind of play out. You try Netscape and you're blown away by the possibilities. You're still working at the telecom company. Kind of, are you thinking now you're ready for your next, adventure?
Yeah. So.
You're fluent in German, right? You're fluent in German.
Yeah.
And did you have like a German wife, or like somebody? Did you already have a family at the time?
My kids were all born in Germany, 2 in Hessen, 2 in Bavaria, and my wife was English. She joined me in Germany, and we got married while living there. And but my kids were all born there.
Do you always know that you want to go back someday to New Zealand?
No, I wasn't convinced. I loved Germany. I really loved it. We had a great life there. Lived in a village, not far from where I worked. I didn't know whether it was or wasn't a great place to start businesses because I had no idea how to start businesses.
Yeah.
The fact that it had no support network or venture capital, I had no idea because I didn't know what they were. So I didn't miss it.
So what made you go back at one?
So I went through a couple of experiences. So 96, 96, when after using Netscape and being convinced there was a revolution coming, I did start another business then with another friend, again, guy that I knew. We started a business together building websites for companies, and everybody wanted a website suddenly. It was pretty trivial, pretty easy to do back then. And so we started building websites, and I actually got pretty quickly bored with that. I thought initially it was exciting and it was new and it's breaking new ground. And then I realized it was devolving into which font to use and what kind of offset for a drop shadow. And I got pretty bored with the whole website thing and thought, okay, new lesson for me is coloring in between the lines is kind of not for me. I need to build stuff, do new things. So I just sort of stepped out of that business, handed it to my co-founder. He ran it for another 15 years as his business, but yeah, it wasn't kind of for me. I'd been asked by Inmarsat, the satellite agency based in London, the global satellite agency, to come and do some consulting for them, because at this time there were 2 low Earth orbit satellite networks being set up, Global Star and Iridium, one by Motorola, to try and do what Elon Musk has done in the last couple of years, basically, back in 97, 98. And Inmarsat had a network of 4 geostationary orbit satellites providing voice communications for ships at sea. They saw this competition coming and they wanted to add an IP network to their voice network, and they were designing a next generation satellite to do that. So they wanted me to come do some consulting. So I said, yep, that sounds pretty exciting. So I commuted back and forth to London for a large part of that year. But then I wasn't building anything. I was designing and giving them direction and helping them choose what things to use. But I wasn't going to be seeing it through to building it. So I went and joined some people I worked with while at Deutsche Telekom. They were at IBM and had led a project to build the first basically software system to run a GSM digital mobile network for the telecom operator in Sweden. They built it for that operators need. They did. They obviously hadn't learned the lesson that Frank and I learned back with the single customer, but they actually built some software. But these guys, in a questionable IP move, to be honest, they left IBM and started their own business. I joined them. We offered this software business system so that you're able to actually bill your subscribers and work out how much they've used and be able to activate a subscriber on the network and do all it. So basically the software to run all the hardware that you've just bought from Nokia. So we sold that, and we were ready at exactly the time where, like I said, every country in the world issued 3 or 4 digital mobile communication licenses to brand new companies who had brand new networks and no way to figure out how to get money from their subscribers or even give their subscribers service. And they were desperate. And companies like IBM and Accenture and others, Logica, were all building bespoke systems, but we had the only product that you could buy off the shelf that did it. So within 2 years, we listed on the NASDAQ. So we had to move the headquarters to Atlanta to do it, but listed on the NASDAQ. And we were valued in 99, we were valued higher than BMW.
Wow.
And then we were eventually acquired by a company called SEMA for, I think, 5.7 billion, I think it was, something like that. And then, so I exited from that and went to look around for what I'm going to do next. My wife was getting a bit homesick for UK, and I had an opportunity to go and help a business over there. So we ended up moving to UK.
So you had your first big exit. That was like this company went IPO.
Yeah. That was so.
That's pretty big deal.
Cool. That was pretty cool. Yeah. So I went to UK.
What did that experience kind of teach you? Are there any lessons there?
Some of the lessons that were useful later, some of them that weren't. One of them was if you've got a great sales team, you can sell a product that its users hate. That was maybe true in the 1990s. It's definitely not true today, I'll tell you that when we get to Cami. But back in the 90s, sales were made to the C-suite alone, and the users of that software had no voice, were not stakeholders in a buying decision. So you were selling the benefits to the executives running the organization, not the people actually using it. But the other lesson, of course, was be in the right place at the right time, or when the right time comes, make sure you're ready. Mm-hmm. So when the time came, everybody knew that we need to build a product for this. But by the time they realized it was too late, because the window was only open for like 2 years. And this applies to Cami later as well, you can only benefit from lucky breaks or market timing if you're there, if you've done the work and the prep and all the hard graft to be there when the market arrives. And that was true there. And it's also true of Cami.
With the COVID stuff?
You went back to London after your exit and had you worked in a few companies there as well?
Yeah. Helped out, worked at some companies, worked at some companies, wasn't really doing a whole heck of a lot there, raising my family, after those kids, and then jumped at the chance to join some Kiwis who had started a company and were expanding into Europe. Needed somebody who spoke German to talk to Siemens and some other German customers, businesses, partners. So I jumped into that, and actually ended up running the Asia Pacific operation and moving back to New Zealand to do that. Because managing Asia Pacific from London was getting to be a bit of a pain.
Right. So it was more opportunistic that you moved back. You weren't really kind of looking for it. It just happened because you had this role.
So I wasn't kind of looking for it today to as such. So I went through a divorce, which was a difficult time when I was trying to restart from scratch. Was looking to get back into the startup area a bit. And the appeal of coming back to New Zealand started to emerge. But it was also really to shorten my commute because I was based in Cambridge. I had a 4-hour drive to Heathrow Airport, and then I would fly to somewhere in Asia every second week. I might go to Beijing, or I might go to Jakarta, I might go to Kuala Lumpur, I might go to Hong Kong. But every second week I was spending in Asia. And that wasn't, I think in about a 2-year period, I flew the equivalent of to the moon and back twice, kind of. So, coming back to New Zealand, at least New Zealand is in Asia Pacific, even if it's in the far-flung corner of it. So that just made some logistical sense.
Bob, so you went from being kind of like a CTO builder to what doing more like BD partnerships?
Yeah, we kind of skipped the bit where I did an MBA at the end of the 90s while this big boom was going on with LHS and the mobile communication systems. I also studied to get an MBA because engineering was still very uncool in the 90s, even at the start of the dot-com boom. It might already have been cool in the US. Not convinced. It wasn't very cool, and I thought I need to be a business guy. I need to like move up and do more businessy kind of stuff. And I haven't really ever addressed with myself whether that was the right move or not. But anyway, I became more businessy. LHS, I was running initially the product management, and then even got more businessy, running the marketing and business development there. And from then on, of course, there's no way back to the tools. So I was the business guy.
Did you miss it, or do you miss it?
I miss it very much. I'll be honest. Like I say, I don't think I've been honest with myself. I miss it every day. I spent the first 20 years of my career building software, and the second 20 years building companies that build software. But I loved building software. I still do it. I write code, but I've written not a single line of code in the Cami code base, just to reassure you. But I'm doing I'm doing it for data analysis, data science, SQL, R, this kind of Python coding these days. So it was the MBA that was kind of the trigger point of the switch point of my career. So from then on, I'm doing business roles. So I came back to New Zealand with Open Cloud. So that was Open Cloud, and that was 27 years into my OE when I finally got back.
So you sort of, it sounds like New Zealand was your OE from being in Germany. It's like you started your life with a small OE in New Zealand for the first 21 years. Kind of did most of your life in Germany.
Yeah, there was a period where I'd lived half my life in New Zealand, first half of my life in New Zealand, and the second half in Germany. And I thought, pretty soon it's going to overtake. I'm going to be more German than Kiwi, I think.
Yeah, you're probably more German than I am. Like, you've lived longer than I have.
Here's a fun fact with my history and living in Germany. While I lived in Germany, I tracked down the Luftwaffe pilot who shot down my grandfather in the Second World War.
Wow.
He lived in Hamburg. I looked up the Lufthansa archives, and I found he was shot down. He survived, by the way, but he was shot down in France. And I looked up the night fighter squadron covering the south of France, and there was only one plane shot down that night by one pilot. So I found the guy.
And the guy was alive?
Yeah, he was still alive. Yeah.
Was your grandpa alive?
He was an ace. He was actually a squadron leader, which would have made my grandfather feel a lot better. He was their ace squadron leader that shot him down. But my grandfather, unfortunately, had passed away back in the 90s. So.
But when you met him, what was that like?
He had actually met multiple people that he'd shot down before. So it wasn't like a big revelation for him. But he was he was old by then, but still very professional. So that was fascinating. Anyway, nothing to do with technology.
No, but that's super interesting. And so then in New Zealand, what was like when you got there? What did you feel what was there a technology scene or like a startup scene back in the day when you arrived back in New Zealand? And what did you think of it?
Yeah, there was a scene, and that was I'm thinking back now, trying to remember how I was feeling coming back, but there was definitely some trepidation about coming back. I know I was coming back. I had a job that I could carry on doing, but I'd been pretty much cut off from New Zealand for a long time. Like living in Germany, again, there was no internet. I never met another New Zealander the whole time I lived in Germany for almost 20 years. My news from home, my parents would sometimes send me newspaper clippings or a video cassette with a recording of the All Blacks' most recent game that I could watch a month later. I knew very little of what's going on. I've got a big blank in my prime ministers of New Zealand in this period. No idea who they are.
Probably didn't miss much, right?
No, I don't think I missed a lot. But yeah, coming back, there was trepidation. Like, New Zealand's a long way from everywhere. And
why'd you pick New Zealand? Like, why don't you just go somewhere like Singapore, somewhere closer to the customers?
Open Cloud, we couldn't afford to finance me, and I wasn't going to go. If I was going to go and live anywhere on my own costs, it was going to be New Zealand. So that was basically the simple equation.
I see.
But yeah, I was I had a new partner by then. We came back. 2010, we came back to New Zealand, and happily it came straight back to a really busy kind of startup scene. Jenny Morell was great. Jenny Morell runs the annual Morgo Startup Conference and runs a venture capital firm, or did. And she introduced me to a lot of people, startup founders. She was really good. One of the people she invested in me ended up being one of the first investors in Cami, a guy who had just come back. I'd actually been at university with, but hadn't seen 40 years or so. But he'd just come back from working at Google, had a few loose dollars to invest. But yeah, there was various people I met coming back who just introduced me to more and more people. And that's how it led on to meeting the original guy with the idea for VMob. Dave and I joined him. We were the first two to join this guy. He was very much the lead founder, and he was one of those really charismatic storyteller founders, the ones that investors love. Spellbind people with the strength of his vision and storytelling. It was quite a wonder to watch. And he left Dave and I to kind of build the business in the background. But yeah, he was a very inspiring character.
What was take us to that? So you come to New Zealand, you start meeting people, and you meet this guy who's a compelling storyteller. What's he kind of pitching? What's the story he's telling?
He had come back from UK relatively recently, having exited from a business in the UK that he had been co-founder of. He had an idea to build kind of platform that didn't really come off, but it was the idea of having one platform that had all of the like special offers from all the retailers on it that people could go in, a bit like the old coupon books, I guess, that, they would give out. So that turned out not to be the business, but that was the start. You've got to start with something. I think the same like I did earlier. You've got to start somewhere and keep pivoting until you find something that solves a problem that's worth solving. Right. So yeah, we ended up having a platform that was providing personalization for retailers in their mobile app, personalization based on, that's what I think you've spoken to Dave, what he was talking about. So it was the customers were retailers and the product was basically a server, an API to a server that would push personalization into the retailer's own mobile app.
Interesting. That's where you started.
That was where we pivoted to from the sort of general coupon book thing.
I see. And you thought this was a compelling idea?
He made it sound like one. Definitely. No, it was. We were at one point, we reached the second fastest growing tech company in New Zealand in 2017. And that's when they couldn't see where the future growth was going to come from. And that's when I flipped to full time at Cami, which we'd already started.
Yeah. So let's get into Cami. So tell us more about kind of how you came up with the idea. What was the idea behind it? And yeah, what are you building today?
Yeah. So the origin was meeting my co-founders in their final year of university because of the Auckland University Business School startup competition that they had entered. And they entered it with an application that Jordan and Henji had written themselves, a software application. And it was to solve a problem they had because they were turning up at lectures with printouts of the presentation that the professor had shared beforehand. And all of them were taking notes in class on top of the slides. And then they were photocopying their slides for everybody, exchanging them out, and looking at each other's notes. And Henji and Jordan decided to implement this in the browser. And they made a web app that enabled you to upload any document into it, share that with any of your student colleagues, and then you could all together make notes on it. You could draw on it, type on it. You could add comments along the side and have threaded conversations about different parts of the slide that is tagged to a piece on the slide. So this meant they could carry on afterwards, even when they're at home, continue the discussions. Everybody got to share it without all this printing and photocopying and exchanging paper. Everybody's backpack got a little bit lighter. So it was solving their problem, and they put it out there on the internet, and a bunch of other students that they didn't know picked it up and started using it as well. So they came into the startup competition with a business plan around, could this be a business? This was 2012. And I happened to be 2012. I happened to be one of the judges in this. It was the end of 2012. I was one of the judges. I got to meet them, and there was two of us judges that met with them, and we had a disagreement where the other judge said, "You're never going to make a business in education. Everyone knows students got no money." And I just felt, after the discussion with them, these are three really smart people with kind of complementary skill sets, really driven, willing to work hard on something. That, for me, that's the secret sauce for me. I don't need anything else. I don't even need an idea. The idea, will come with when people like that work on something together. You might have to pivot a couple of times, but when I see people with the sparks like that, I think with everything else, if everything else goes right, this is kind of the secret sauce for me. So I said to them, you want to actually start a business? We met up afterwards. You want to actually start a business? Because New Zealand and Hong Kong, I just read in The Economist, were the two easiest places in the world to start a business. And they were totally up for it. They had job offers from the US and from New Zealand. Angie and Jordan could have taken jobs in Silicon Valley the next day. So I opened my laptop there in the cafe, and half an hour later, we had a business underway. And I went and talked to.
So you convinced them. You basically said, like, did you convince them, or did you? Well,
They were already really keen themselves. They were weighing up their job offers. Like I said, they were kind of weighing it up. They didn't know what it meant. Where to raise capital, I think, or how to get it off the ground. They wanted help with that. What do we do? So I went to the David Russell, a friend that I'd studied with back in engineering school back in the 80s. As I say, he'd just come back from Google. He was willing. He was trying to set up an incubator at the time. We joke since it's the most successful incubator in New Zealand's history because it's got a 1-for-1 hit rate. So he had been talking to some other angel investors about setting up this incubator for startups. And so they all came together. We came together and we put a massive seed round of, I think, 40,000.
Pretty big, pretty massive. That's New Zealand dollars too.
Yeah, that's New Zealand dollars. And I'm like, okay, so I'm not quitting my job, but here's $40,000 that'll buy some Google Cloud credits and thing. And that was enough.
I mean, what was
they
the
didn't need any more than that.
For that 40,000?
I can't remember, but it was $200,000 or so.
200,000 valuation?
Yeah. Yeah, we were nothing.
I've never heard of a valuation lower than $1 million.
Yeah, it was. I remember it was really low. I think it probably was about that. I mean, this was me, some guy nobody knew who'd come back from Europe, and 3 kids who were still at uni, right? Nobody was investing in us. The 40,000 was, hey, I'm never going to see this again, but let's see what they can do. And
so did you invest a little bit yourself as well?
Yeah. I put money as well. Yeah. So they asked me if I wasn't going to come and join full time, can I be chairman? So I met up with them for the next couple of years while I'm trying to build VMob. I met up with them every week in a cafe, and we sat down and we went through, what did you do last week? What are you going to do next week? Kind of thing.
You probably thought of this as like your community service or something, right?
I don't know what I was thinking, but they stuck at it. The thing, I stuck at it because they did. And, there was no money. They were living on noodles. They were living at home. They have told me since that some of the times when we'd meet up in a cafe and I'd buy them lunch and they'd come in, that was the only meal they had that week. They never told me that at the time.
That week or that day?
That week, because otherwise they're just living on pot noodles, eating a pot noodles. They were doing it really lean. They weren't paying themselves any salary in those early days. But then they kept building. The product kept getting better. More and more people started to using it.
And it was the same product? The product was the same kind of idea?
It was the same idea. It was collaborative note-taking on any existing document, or PDF was the restriction back then. But it turned out there's a lot of people around the world started to find it who were not university students, but needed to write on top of printed scanned documents. And over the next few years, we kind of searched. The radar was kind of going like this, searching for a product market fit somewhere where a lot of people were using it. Some were starting to pay for it. We were experimenting with pricing, sold lifetime. I think we still got a few lifetime license customers who paid $20 in 2014. But we were kind of trying to find this problem. People started coming with, this would be great if you added this, this, and this. So we started getting a backlog of things to go into the product. And it's still
Who were the customers? They were always like college students or somebody else?
So here's the fascinating thing. So not so much college students. Turned out there were a few thousand of those and that, but there were media companies who have rough drafts of the magazine cover or something that they printed out and scanned and want to draw and write and comment on. There were real estate agents who have floor plans that they want to move things around on and write on. Engineering companies, maybe with blueprint stuff. There were hotels who have lots of receipts and things like that they want to sign or write something onto. There are all these different categories of users. Some of them are still using Cami today and haven't even noticed that we pivoted to education anyway. But also school teachers, particularly in North America, school teachers were using it. And we got to 2016, and we maybe had $10,000 or $20,000 ARR. So, this is a long, slow grind. This is not a stellar takeoff story.
Right.
But already, Angie and Jordan were just pushed too hard by all of this backlog of these things. Lawyers were the other one, and lawyers wanted redaction, true redaction. They wanted Bates numbering on the things. Real estate agents wanted different widgets that you could put on their things. Everybody had a different requirement. To disrupt anything, we're going to have to focus on a vertical, and we're going to have to be the world's best at this vertical from New Zealand with the scarce resource we've got. And it's got to be a tiny vertical, and we've got to totally try and dominate it. So took a long time, I think, to convince my co-founders that was true. They knew a lot more about starting a business and startups and venture capital than I did when I started any businesses. They were way better educated in that side of it. But eventually, I think, it became clear that it wasn't going to work. Backlog was getting bigger. There were too many conflicting requirements from different sectors. So we borrowed a holiday house from a board member on Waiheke Island, and we locked ourselves away for 3 days on Waiheke Island. Said, right, we're not coming back until we've chosen a vertical. More specifically, we've chosen a user who will be our champion.
Was that all led by you? You were the driving force behind that?
So I don't want to give the impression that this was a Bob show at all. In the early days, so Henji, I would say, has been the most consistent drive of our founding team from the beginning. He's never, ever faltered. I think the rest of us, if we're honest, have had periods where we've gone through the is it worth it cycle. So Henji had the drive. They're all smart people. They're all very aware of what it takes to build a business and to raise capital and everything. I had lessons from the past, but I was also learning from them. And I think people also assume that I taught them all these lessons or something. But there's a lot of lessons, like the ones about selling to executives and ignoring users, that were totally wrong for the 2010s, where user-led adoption was starting to dominate the buying process, right? So I had bad lessons that I'd learned. And the problem is you don't know which are bad and which are good lessons. So they're in their minds, they're trying to figure out, this guy's got some great ideas, got some great input, but how do we separate the good from the right from the wrong? And I'm going, actually, I've learned some things. Henji and Jordan from the beginning, their total obsession with the user and the user experience was just fascinating for me to watch. White glove training and onboarding like individual users who maybe never were going to pay us anything. But watching them get on a call at 3 a.m. with a teacher in Philadelphia who was had a problem and try and debug and figure out what it was and debug it on the fly and update the product and get them a new version so that they can finish their lesson.
Wow.
Like I had never seen this before. So we're all very, very different, the four of us. We've all got strengths. We've all got weaknesses. We kind of cover each other's weaknesses. But I don't think there's any one of us who can say, I was the leader, to be honest. So I was the driver for the focus because I'd learned that lesson the hard way several times.
Uh-huh.
VMob, to be honest, was a classic. At a pathological inability to focus on anything. We pivoted so many times and it felt like chasing rainbows. It's quite the frustration of it. But if you don't focus and say no, focusing means saying no to opportunities. Nobody likes doing that. That's why you've got to be so brutal when you do it. And we meant it this time. Everybody bought in. We chose the teacher as our user. We chose education, K-12 education as our market. Partly based on data and usage data and growth, but to be honest, it was 90% a decision based on the fact that teachers kept telling us over and over again they loved the product. They loved the impact it had on their lives and where it was going, and they couldn't wait to see what else they could do. Everybody else liked it, saw the promise in it, would pay for it. If we did this, did that, we're happy to pay as long as they needed it. Teachers loved it. And with our scarce resources, the other thing I knew was the only way for growth is going to be word of mouth. And for word of mouth to be your main growth driver, you do need a product that users love, right? Nobody's out there at a party talking about Microsoft Word. So we went out, we sat there, we went around it for 3 days, but we chose the teacher. We came back, education's it. And we said, right, from this day, we're no more sales activity with lawyers, real estate agents, no more marketing. The website changed within a week to we're an education company. Interesting.
Was it hard kind of getting to that focus?
We knew it was necessary. All of us knew it was necessary when we made it. It's still really, really hard to turn down opportunity. Even when I know that, like most people, and I've been on so many boards where this conversation goes, right, there's so much going on, we need to focus. Everybody will agree. Every single board member and every board I've been to will agree with that. We've got to focus, right? Then you say the second part of it. Great. So we're going to stop this. And then everyone else in the room goes, wait. That might come right. You know, it might turn into something. Let's just keep that pot on the boil. Let's just keep that going. And the big misunderstanding that I think people make is that they think opportunities are like lottery tickets. You just collect them, just hold on to them. You never know. It might come in. Just, oh, there's another one. Just keep them because you don't know which ticket's going to come up. But they're actually an invitation to go and do work. If you try and do work, split yourself, your attention span as an executive, let alone your actual hourly work across multiple of these opportunities, you're going to do a shit job on all of them. And you're going to build a mediocre company. So I totally believe that. And we weren't going to be that. And we were all totally on board with that. And from that day, we stopped talking to all of these others. And we won't give anybody any special. We haven't built any feature for anyone outside education ever since. We haven't made a sales call or done marketing to anyone ever since. Interestingly, though, we still have the Savoy Hotel in London is still a Kami customer. They don't know that we're now a teaching platform. They're still using it to whatever they do with their receipts.
Wow.
Companies, I think the New York Times stopped since the Canadian Stock Exchange was paying up until year before last.
Wow.
Yeah, we still have these customers in our user base. I come across them now and again and go, Times.
That's cool. So looking back, if you had started with a focus on education right from the get-go, do you think you would have been more successful, as successful? Like, do you think the fact that you focused on education at the time that you did helped Kami kind of become what it is? Like, yeah, how, like, or do you think it makes no difference? Like, when you picked to focus on education?
I think we got the timing of that. We chose the timing of that right. We weren't forced to do it. That's why it was so hard. It was hard to say no to chase all of these lawyer opportunities that we had, but it was also hard to pick that vertical when we didn't actually have to. There was no external force. We had no burning platform. It was just we wanted to build a unicorn basically, and we weren't going to build a mediocre unicorn. There are no mediocre unicorns, and we knew we had to be great at something. And it was clear that the path was leading us away from being the best in the world at one thing. Yeah, I think the timing we got right because we'd bumbled around for 2 or 3 years looking for this product market fit. We'd found all of these users. We'd talked to a lot of them. We'd experimented with pricing and who's prepared to pay versus use. So we had enough information we felt to choose the right vertical and be confident and never look back. If we'd tried to choose a year before, I think we could have chosen possibly, but we might have spent the next couple of years looking back, wishing we'd chosen a different one, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting. So you kind of feel like you needed that time to actually pursue all the options to kind of get a sense of like how good of a market that actually is, how their appetite to pay is, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, kind of. Probably depends how complete your idea is at the beginning.
Interesting.
Remember, we were trying to map a personal bit of software that Henry and Jordan had written to how do you build a business out of this? I mean, it's a big leap to make. And yeah, like with VMob, your business ends up being based on something very different than what you started with.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think you can plan that out like in a business plan, even though it was a business plan competition that they went for. I don't think you can build startups on business plans.
So where's the business today? I'm sure you have surpassed the 200K valuation.
Yeah, we took a investment last year that was based on a 300 million valuation.
New Zealand or USD?
300 million New Zealand dollar valuation. We took an investment last year from a private equity firm in Boston Ventures.
Where do you want to go next? Are you growing it? I mean, you said, I think like 90% of the business is in the US, you said?
We've been heavily US-centric business since those early days, since 2017. And the investment that we've taken last year, we paid out all our early stage investors. We had about, top of my head, 3 or 4 rounds of seed capital. The last round was in 2018. We raised $1.5 million New Zealand dollars from an Australian VC and from the Flying Kiwi Angels and the New Zealand Government Investment Fund and a few others. But we were already cash flow positive going into that round, and we continued thereafter and have been profitable for the last few years. The pandemic gave us a real growth burst. We were on the Deloitte Fast 50, we were the fastest growing tech business in New Zealand in 2021 and 2022. That's based on revenue over the previous 3 years. Each time. 2, we were named in the Time magazine's 100 most influential companies, the only New Zealand company on that. And that was quite surreal seeing us alongside Apple and Netflix.
That's cool. So, and what is it? Why, like, is it that a lot of teachers use Kami as part of their workflow? I mean, I saw on the website 40 million users, right? Is that mainly teachers or professors or students or?
Teachers and their students. It turned out, it turned out in a pandemic with all the schools closing and trying to go remote, that something that was extremely valuable to teachers was the ability to share some document, curriculum, textbook, whatever material with their students, have either for each student to get their own copy of it, to work on it and turn it in, or for the students to work collaboratively on one with the teacher. And also the ability of the teacher, while the student is doing their work, for the teacher to actually, as a collaborator, intervene and give them help, and give them pointers, put them on the right track, actually appear with little video annotations within the student's homework that they're doing, getting an actual little video annotation comment from a teacher saying, hey, I can see you're going off track here. Go on to question 2. We'll come back to question 1, just as a video. If you can imagine, when the teachers and students weren't having any face-to-face contact for months and months, that ability to interact asynchronously, but kind of live with students in the work they're doing, related directly to the problem they're working on, was just extremely valuable and useful. So we gave the product away for free to any school closed by COVID from early 2020. It was our only product, and education by then was our only market, but we just saw what was helping. We heard a cry for help, so we just said, any school, you can have it for free. We flipped everybody in the company. We only had 20 people in the company at the time, but everybody in the company was working on customer support, debating customers, supporting customers to get them up and live using it. And I'd done a calculation early in, I think, March 2020 when this started, and it reached the US, our core market. I came into a meeting with the founders and I said, okay, I got some good news. If we all take a 50% pay cut, we've got enough cash to last until September, and this thing should be over way before then. So we're all good.
But it sounds like, did you have to take a pay cut, or you raised money, or what did you?
Well, at end of March, April, something extraordinary happened. So we're offering it worldwide on our website and in our marketing communications and on social media as free for any school closed due to COVID. We got a purchase order come in from a school district in Massachusetts in the US, and it was like $5,000 or $6,000. Can't remember the amount come in, and I thought, oh, that would be really useful. I phoned up the buyer who had sent the purchase order in and said, look, I know we sent you a quote for it, but events have overtaken us. We're actually offering it free now. And I can see all the schools in Massachusetts are already closed. I know you're closed. So we're actually offering it free now. So you can cancel your purchase order. And he said, yes, we know. And we think it's great what you're doing. And we think we would like you to keep doing that for as many schools as you can, for as long as you can. So we budgeted for this. We've got the money there. Actually, thanks for reaching out. Can you send me a new quote for double the number of users? And I'll send you the PO, the updated PO. And I thought, wow, that's obviously an outlier. Told everybody else in the firm. Everybody's like, oh my God, that guy's Jesus or something. And then a few days later, another purchase order lands. The following week, we got twice as many purchase orders as the week before. Okay, so that's all the good people. That's definitely can't continue. The following week, doubled again. And I keep telling these people it's free, and they kept sending purchase orders. We've got the budget. It's already approved for the next 2 years. Take our money, basically. So user numbers and sales doubled every 2 weeks right through that year.
That entire year?
Yeah.
It doubled every week.
Yeah. So the founders between us, so we were working, so because of the US time zone, to get hold and talk to these people, I and others talking to them, Angie, we're up at like 5 o'clock in the morning to talk to people there. Late in the evening, people in UK and Europe were coming online, and Italy and that, wanting their licenses or wanting to send a purchase order. So we were working for a long time, 10-hour days. The rest of my life just came to a complete standstill. And this is 7 days a week. And it wasn't until the weekend before Christmas 2020 where my partner and I drove over the hill here at Coromandel to a beach with no mobile coverage, no signal, where we actually went for a swim on the beach and spent a few hours there. And I said, it was a Sunday. And I said, okay, I just worked it out. This is the first day off I have had since February. It was an intense year, but we got a lot of things right that year that a lot of our competitors or people in the industry, in the sector, didn't manage to get right. I think we had a pretty world-beating growth rate that year, even compared to people in the education industry. First, in recognizing that, okay, this pandemic isn't going on forever and these people's patience isn't going to last forever. We just have to get these people live, was the first one. And when the sales started coming, okay, we have to get these people on board as customers. So everybody became sales or customer support. We stopped all marketing, stopped most product development, other than an on-the-fly migration of our database to a more scalable, horizontally scalable database architecture, which Jordan pulled off in about a two-week period. That's now posted on the website of Cockroach Database as one of their hero stories. But all of this was going on.
Database?
Yeah, we had to move from a Postgres like database, which was already running on the biggest machine Google could give us anywhere in the world. It was a single machine database, basically. So we had to migrate to one that you could scale horizontally across multiple machines. Jordan was spending every day, every night, freeing up headroom in the database for the growth we were going to get next day by cutting out log tables and optimizing and merging, taking stuff off to other databases, just so that we would be able to get through the following day. Also had time to research the best database to move to, pick this actually unproven, pretty new database, and then pull off the migration to it. Yes. Yeah. So on Cockroach Labs, you'll find the Cami story in there of 2020 and what Jordan pulled off.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
It was a pretty wild time.
What's the plan moving forward? So, pretty big scale. How do you see the next 3 to 5 years play out?
Yeah, obviously the investors that have come in are focused on the growth where we go from here. They look at the growth we've had and what we've done over the last 10 years, and they go, that's cute, well done. Now we're going to get some serious growth in here. And that's leading, basically, it's still education. It's still focused K-12 education, but there's a lot of problems that aren't solved in K-12 education. We've been, bringing more AI-powered capabilities in, but we're not giving anybody a chatbot. We are using where it's helping the teacher to perform tasks that they have to perform every day more efficiently, but in very specific ways. If they've got a document that they've used for the last 7 years about volcanoes, but it's tailored for a grade 7 audience, and they have to teach grade 5 today, they can get it regraded. They can get the language adjusted to a grade 5 reading level, right? Those kind of things that are just helpful for teachers to teach and for students to use interactively with the teacher, collaboratively in an environment where they're not just getting ChatGPT to do their homework for them. So there's a lot of problems to solve in education. There's a lot of the world still to break. The US is still our major market by far. We have people and customers across the world in another 70 countries. We have paying customers. We have people in UK, South Africa, Brazil, Canada. But most of the schools in the world are not in the US. So that's where a lot of the growth opportunity is.
What percent of US schools are using you?
There are teachers in over 90% of US schools using us. That doesn't mean that district is a customer or is paying, but we have a substantial customer base, mostly not yet fully saturated. So we have a massive expansion opportunity within our customer base, as well as the white space, all of the other districts that we're wearing down, that are coming around.
How you found the EdTech sector? I mean, because it's notoriously difficult to sell. They don't have budget. Things change. I mean, after COVID, I'm sure a lot of those budgets got slashed. How did you sort of how do you find that?
Personally, I found it a wonderful market to be in and to be building for and selling into. The people in that market, call it a market, but the people in it are mission driven themselves. They're not starting up businesses, but they're trying to do good in the world. They're there for the benefit of the student, even the administrators. Nobody's taking an administration job in a school board to make $1 million, right? They're doing it to try and do good. And when you are speaking to them, and they react badly to a hard sell generally anyway, but they're customers that you can easily trust when they say, yeah, if you give it to me for free for 6 months, I'll pay after that kind of thing. They'll do that without having to have a contract with 75 pages of fine print. It is a market full of trustworthy, good, well-meaning, well-intentioned people, which is absolutely wonderful to work in. In terms of actually the mechanics of it and the financials of how do you make money because they got no money and they don't spend it. We've heard this from a lot. And a lot of VCs, when we tried to raise venture capital, we really struggled, right, in New Zealand and in the US to ever raise capital. We only ever raised 2.5 million New Zealand dollars is all we could get.
What's the markup on that? Like a 10x, 20x?
Yeah. There's people who invested $5,000 and got $5 million back kind of style. So, people did well out of it who invested, who took a chance, but we couldn't get any of the VCs in New Zealand to be interested in us to
That's like a 1,000. Is that 1,000?
take a second meeting. Yeah, it depends what stage you came in at, but the early people in that first round have got more than a bigger return than that. Yeah, so they did well, but yeah, we found what we accidentally discovered alongside a whole bunch of others like Slack and Dropbox was that in the 2010s, user-led adoption was driving buying cycles in enterprises. And a district of anywhere between 2 and 500 schools in the US is basically an enterprise sale. A school is like an SMB sale, but a district that we're selling to, that's an enterprise sale. An enterprise buying, they're driven by user adoption of, and you've seen it yourself with Slack and Dropbox and things, the people in the organization start using it themselves. They eventually pester their managers to have a look at it and buy it, and then it spreads across the organization. And that has become a mainstream buying process across most industries, but particularly powerful in education because it's driven by word of mouth and teachers talk and schools don't compete with each other. If you're selling into businesses that compete with each other, you're going to have limited word of mouth overflow between. There's no barriers between schools. Word of mouth is completely open end. But yeah, user-led adoption, driving buying decisions. The district people at one point were telling us, don't come to me unless my teachers are using your product. I don't want to see a demo unless my teachers are using your product. And we had already, we leaned really heavily into that when a lot of others were trying to sell top down into a market that wasn't receptive to it at the time.
And what about after COVID? Did you guys lose contracts? Did budgets get slashed?
I'm going to say we've done better than the industry in holding on to our customers as well. We pivoted from in 2020, 2021, everybody in the business was in sales or activation of customers and support. Beyond that, we flipped. We said, right, the name of the game is flipped from acquisition of customers to retention. And we flipped to hold on to these customers. A lot of them are going to want to leave. Now they're back in. A lot of them are going to want to throw all the computers in the basement and never look at them again. And we definitely had a cycle of that. But we've held on to our customer base right through. You saw companies that had like screencasting or like Zoom in education, but they had this kind of curve where it went bink, plonk in 2020, 2021. We've held on to our customer base and are using that as the platform that we're then growing from. But everybody was focused on user retention, which was the secret to customer retention. As long as the teachers and students were carrying on using it and getting value, the schools and districts were not canceling contracts, they were renewing.
Makes sense. How did you, do you have a sales team in the US? How do you sell into districts in the US, kind of based from New Zealand?
So up until 2021, so I came in full time to build up the sales team in 2017. Before that, Engie and Olive were doing the sales themselves in between writing code and building websites. I came in to build up a sales team, initially based on New Zealand, just with students straight out of university helping out. I hired the first 3 salespeople in the US in 2019. So I had 3 people. I split the US into vertical slices. They worked remotely. They did a region each, and I did the rest of the world myself, as well as managing them. That actually saw us right the way through 2020, because while we were totally focused on sales and customer activation, one of the things we were not doing was recruiting. So we hired virtually nobody. A lot of our other players in the industry saw the upswing in usage and sales coming in, and they went out to try and recruit a huge team. They got venture capital. They spent time talking to VCs, which we didn't. They went and talked to VCs, spent months doing due diligence, got some money, went out to try and hire 100,000 people. In the meantime, the window was closing. So we just put our shoulder to the wheel, and we didn't start hiring cycles or interviewing people or talking to VCs. We just did that. So by the end of 2020, it was still just me doing rest of the world. 3 salespeople. We'd had 2 customer success people who had started at the beginning of 2020, who I moved across into sales, and then started to build out the sales team there, but also to pivot to focus on retaining the customers that we had. And that took us a couple of years to get right on the retention side of things. But we've retained that strong base throughout it and maintained that revenue growth, 2021, 2022, that put us top of the Deloitte Fast 50.
Wow. It's impressive. Bob, what are your hours? I mean, it sounds like you're working a lot. What are your work hours?
Not me. So at the moment, my role, it was changing. So I'm stepping back to the board level. My direct reports, managed by Henji. Henji is continuing in the CEO role. He is still as driven as ever to run Cami for the next 20 years and build it beyond. So I'm back on the board. We have some of our private equity partners on the board. I'm still the chairman of that, but yeah, I'm doing much less of the day-to-day, trying to make less decisions. I keep telling people I'm not making decisions now. I'm trying to advise, mentor, coach, and help out. That's what my role looks like.
Sounds like you had a very long career behind you already, so it's probably makes sense to.
You think I'm ready for a rest?
Yeah,
Bob,
I mean, you seem pretty energetic still.
Was Cami like the biggest kind of financial outcome out of everything you've done?
No, but it's my second most successful startup in that whole career I was part of. But what I'm proudest of, I think, what we achieved and the good we did and have done and are continuing to do. But I'm still I'm still in there. I also look at what's happening in the whole AI space at the moment, and I'm just thinking, what a great time to start a business.
Yeah, that's I was going to ask you maybe to wrap up, like what looking at people who are now starting off, in their 20s, and who are experiencing ChatGPT like you have experienced, computers and the internet for the first time. What would you advise them?
I've got no idea. It's like 1996 again, like that too. I've got no idea. I can see multiple timelines reaching out ahead of us, and I've got no idea which one we're on.
What are some of those most likely ones? What are the like most likely ones in your mind?
One of the early investors in Cami was Sam Altman. He invested personally, and he said,
how did he get into? How did you guys find him?
Angie ran into him at a conference and grabbed him as he was heading off stage and talked to him. And he said, and asked him there and then for invest. We were raising around. We were always raising around. I spoke to him and said, okay, we're going to do a safe note. I mean, he was basically the author of that from Y Combinator, right? The author of the safe note. So we're going to do a safe note. He said, oh, that's awesome. I'd shared it around our current shareholders and potential investors in New Zealand who was going to be interested in it. And Sam wired his $10,000 before I'd even sent him the thing, the note, the document. And we spent like another 6 or 7 months with lawyers turning this 3-page safe note into a 75-page list of terms and conditions.
For the New Zealand investors?
For the New Zealand investors, I'm afraid, yeah. So it just spoke to the level of challenge you had at the time raising money. It's a lot easier these days, I believe. We haven't raised since 2018, but yeah, like I said, we had it tough.
Wow. Is that
Anyway, I digress. So the reason I raised him was, so he said back in, I actually said to Sam, the first time I used ChatGPT, it was the first time I've experienced that since using Netscape, since making my first website and opening it in Netscape and seeing the burger site also in Hawaii. So it was that same sort of feeling. His view was the first 2 industries to be impacted by this were going to be software engineering which I didn't really understand at the time, and education, which I very much did. And I thought, so education and software being the first impacted. So that sounds pretty relevant for Cami, given we're a software company with an education product. So I thought I better pay attention to this even more. But yeah, where does it go from here? I've only got questions. Like, what does education even look like whenever you say 12-year-old student has 1,000 Einsteins in their pocket, not just able to answer their question, but to go off and do research and do work for them? Why am I learning Pythagoras again? Why do I need Bernoulli's theorem? Like, kids don't really learn multiplication tables by rote anymore because you've always got a calculator with you on your phone. Like, what does education actually look like? I got no idea. I think schools have a critical part, and human teachers in the future. I don't know how it's going to change. Honestly, universities is a bigger question mark for me. So what is a university?
What do you say? Like, I mean, that like probably lots of people have the same questions. How do you navigate that as a young founder? What would you say to them?
As a young founder and looking to build solutions for the education space?
Or just a young founder in general, looking to build something.
Find somebody who has the problem of dealing with what's happening and solve their problem. Don't try and predict the future. We didn't know there was a pandemic coming. We didn't know in 2012, 2013 that we were even going to be in the education market, the 12 US education market. None of us were former educators. We knew nothing about it. We didn't even know we were going to be in that. We ended up there. We ended up with having one of the best loved products in US education by listening to teachers who had a massive problem. They're overworked. We gave them 8 hours on average back in their work week every week. You imagine you're an overworked teacher and I just gave you 8 hours. They spend that 8 hours with their kids instead of at a photocopier at a printer or struggling with technologies or trying to type stuff into Google Docs or whatever else they're doing. They spend that 8 hours with their kids. Go and find a user who's got a problem, also a problem of coping with AI, I would say, and help them solve their problem. Listen to them. That's what Henji and Jordan and Olive did in the first few years. They listened a lot to users, what they were doing, why they were doing it, what else would make their life easier.
Right. No, that's awesome. That's really helpful. Bob, I think we're way over time, so thank you so much for spending so much time with us. No, that's been fascinating. I mean, such a great career to look back on and learn from. So yeah, I think this is going to be a great episode. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to.
Awesome.
All the best, guys. We'll talk later.
Sure. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to TechMates. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with friends. We'll be back soon with more stories of Kiwi and Aussie founders reshaping the future and disrupting down under. Until next time, keep dreaming big and daring to disrupt.